Hi guys, my name is Matti Sulanto. I'm a photographer, and in this video I'm gonna share some tips and tricks on how to use shutter speed creatively for action photography. I had a chance to attend Sony Kando 2024 event in Norway just a couple of days ago, and over there I had a chance to shoot some downhill riding, and I'm gonna use those pictures as examples in this video. But what I'm going to say in this video applies equally well to all kinds of action photography, whether it's wildlife, flying birds, athletics, race cars, or some other type of action. By using a fast shutter speed, you can completely freeze the action in the frame. And that is the more traditional way to shoot any kind of action, and it's also the easier way to do it. All you have to do is to be able to compose your picture, get the subject in the frame, and hit the shutter exactly at the right moment. Or use a burst shutter on your camera. Modern cameras, like the camera that I was using, the Sony A9 Mark III, they are super fast, so you don't have to even nail the timing. You just use a burst of action, burst frame setting, and you'll be able to cover up to 120 frames per second, and you are almost guaranteed to nail the peak action like that. But that's all you have to be able to do. It's not necessarily super easy, but it's easier than using a slow shutter that I'm gonna talk about just in a moment. But what is fast enough shutter speed? For most action it is 1/2000 or faster, but it really depends on the action that you are shooting. For example, in this picture the rider is pretty much frozen. But if we take a look at the wheels, they are still spinning a little bit and there's motion blur on the wheels. So 1/2000 was not sufficient to completely freeze the picture. But the rider is frozen, and that is enough in this case. But if I wanted to completely freeze everything in the picture, I probably would have needed like 1/4000 or something. And there's one other thing to be aware of. If the action is happening across the frame, from left to right or right to left, you're going to need a faster shutter speed compared to the action that is happening towards the camera or away from the camera. But as always, the key is experimenting. Please go out and experiment and see what kind of results you get with different shutter speeds. 1/2000 is probably a good starting point. You may be able to use slightly longer shutter speed, but also a slightly faster might be necessary to completely freeze the action. It really depends on the action and the way the action happens in the picture. A completely frozen action picture looks really crisp and clean, and that's probably one of the reasons why this is the preferred way to shoot action. It can reveal some details in that action that we can't see with our naked eye. Like in this case, we can see how the rider is holding the handlebar, how the legs and how the feet are on the pedals, and exactly how the bike is flying through the air. However, it can also look a bit static and clinical. I mean, look at this picture. The guy is flying through the air, but the picture just looks so static. There's no motion at all, or no sense of motion at all in this picture, even though we can clearly see that the bike is flying through the air. Here is another example. In the picture, it almost looks like the guy is doing a static wheelie on the ramp. But in reality, he's about to take off and fly through the air at high speed. So sometimes a high shutter speed can almost freeze the action too much, and the picture fails to tell the whole story or convey the action that is actually happening in the frame. So it definitely takes some consideration and experience to know when a high shutter speed is appropriate. In some cases it's not, but there are definitely many situations where a high shutter speed is the way to go. My advice is to practice and see for yourself, and that way you learn to know and learn to predict when a high shutter speed is the way to go. Before I go to the slow end of the shutter speed scale, let me first explain what kind of camera settings I used for these pictures. I'm only going to talk about the exposure related settings because this video is about shutter speeds. I'm not gonna talk about autofocus settings and all that. Only camera exposure settings. Sony offered us a whole bunch of gear to choose from. I chose the A9 Mark III because it is a speed demon. It's made for speed and action photography, super high frame rate, super fast autofocus, and everything is designed for speed. So that was the most appropriate camera for this type of photography, and the lens I chose was the relatively new 24 to 50mm f2.8 G series zoom lens. I love those Sony G series lenses, and that was one reason why I wanted to try this out. And this is also the range I mostly use, and I knew that we can get close to the action, so the wide to standard range was no problem at all. And also a wide angle can offer some really interesting compositions and perspectives in this kind of shooting if you can get close enough. The exposure mode I choose for this kind of action is S, shutter speed priority, and auto ISO. That way I can select my shutter speed and the camera will take care of the rest. It's very easy, and I can concentrate fully on my composition and getting the action right in the frame, and I don't have to worry about anything else. For example, aperture priority wouldn't make much sense in this kind of photography because the results would be pretty much random lottery. The camera might choose fast or slow shutter speed depending on the lighting conditions. So if you want any kind of predictable results, please choose shutter priority. And now let's go to the slow end of the shutter speed scale. With a slow shutter speed, you can embrace the motion in the picture, but while you're at it, you are sacrificing some of the sharpness and clarity. I really do like this more than a completely frozen frame because a slow shutter speed usually conveys the speed and the action so much better than a completely frozen frame. But you have to be prepared for some motion blur because that's what you are going to get inevitably. For this occasion, I went as slow as 1/15, and that is a really slow shutter speed for this kind of a relatively fast action. However, I still got a couple of frames that I really like. These pictures are quite blurry, but you can still clearly see what is going on, and I think they transmit the fast pace of the downhill riding really well. So it always pays to experiment with extreme values when it comes to shutter speeds. The way to shoot these kind of pictures is to move your camera along with the subject, in this case the rider. I was panning and following the rider with my camera and holding the shutter at the same time, shooting bursts. I think I was shooting at 10 frames per second or 20 frames per second, nothing faster than that. I felt anything faster than that is just overkill. The rider is not only going forward, the rider is also going up and down. So with a longer shutter speed, you can't expect completely sharp results because you can't possibly follow both movements. It's hard enough to follow the forward going movement with your camera. You can't possibly also follow the up and down movement with your camera unless you are really super skillful. The riders did several runs down the hill, so I was able to experiment with different shutter speeds, and I think 1/100 or something like that worked quite well. I was able to get the part of the frame sharp, part of the rider sharp, but rest of the picture quite blurry, and a good sense of motion in the frame. And usually those frames look really good if you have a little bit of sharpness and a lot of motion blur. And then one composition tip. I think it's a good idea to leave a little bit of room around the subject and not frame it too tightly. A loose framing can literally help the viewer to put the action into perspective, and it probably delivers the whole story better than a super tight framing. And about the Sony Kando 2024 event in Norway, yes, Sony paid my air tickets and my accommodation. I was happy to attend. There were so many other YouTubers from all over the Nordic countries and photographers, videographers. It was such a nice event to get to know some creators from other countries and people that I've never met before. Fantastic event, and I'd like to say big thanks to Sony for organizing something like this. So there you have it, some tips on how to use shutter speed creatively for action photography. I hope this was useful, and if it was useful and you'd like to support my channel, please do check out my e-zines down below, link down below. That is by far the best way to support my work here on YouTube. Thank you so much for joining in and watching, and I hope to see you soon in the next one.